Now for a What in the World segment. What got my attention this week was a claim by Glenn Beck. Here he is on his radio show last Monday.
What's that number? What is the number of Islamic terrorists? 1%? I think it's closer to 10%, but the rest of the PC world will tell you, oh no, it's minuscule.
So let's do a bit of math here. There are 1.57 billion Muslims worldwide. Take 10% of those Muslims and you get 157 million. That's how many Muslim terrorists Glenn Beck is suggesting there are in the world. 157 million. Beck wondered why, oh why, this wasn't receiving any media coverage. Well, let me suggest one reason. It is total nonsense, a figure made up by Glenn Beck with absolutely no basis in fact. The United States State Department says there were approximately 11,000 terror attacks committed in 2009. This is all terror attacks everywhere in the world, including in Afghanistan and Iraq, which are really war zones. But still, let's do a little more math. Stay with me, Glenn. Let's be very generous and say that it took 100 people to plan and execute each one of those 11,000 attacks. In fact, most of the attacks were solo, at most involving 2 or 3 people, but let's be generous. 100 people times 11,000 terror attacks equals 1,100,000 people. But Glenn Beck's figure is 150 times higher than that. If in fact there are 157 million Muslim terrorists in the world, what were the other 155,900 some odd thousand of them doing last year? We asked CNN's national security analyst Peter Bergen. Bergen has spent decades studying Muslim terrorists. He has interviewed Osama bin Laden. He travels frequently across the world to refresh his knowledge. We found Bergen in Afghanistan. He emailed us to say that Beck's estimate is off by 1,000%. Bergen says most estimates would say 0.1% of all Muslims are terrorists or insurgents. Now, after Beck made this claim that 10% of Muslims are terrorists, his producer got Beck off on a technicality saying, well, that dictionary.com's definition of a terrorist includes people who advocate or support terrorism. Of course, the FBI, the State Department, and most other organizations define terrorist in the more commonsensical sense that they are, well, terrorists, but never mind. And this guy cited some polls to support the claim that many in the Muslim world don't like us and wish us harm. Yes, many of us have been pointing that out for over a decade now. I wrote a Newsweek cover essay 2 weeks after 9/11 titled, Why They Hate Us, to explain just that phenomenon. But hating America is not the same thing as being a terrorist. Believe me, if we had 157 million Muslim terrorists active across the world, we would be hearing more about it. But Beck made another claim in his discourse on terrorism.
You don't think 1%, 0.5% here in the United States of radicals, of people who want to violently overthrow the government is a problem? Of course it is. Why isn't it receiving coverage? Why?
Well, Glenn, again, maybe because it just isn't true. I can't find any poll or study or shred of data that suggests that 1.5 million Americans, which is what that number would work out to, want to violently overthrow their government. Now, there is a Pew poll from March and some similar ones from other groups that found that about 20% of America is angry with the federal government. Does fomenting or supporting such anger against the American government make one a terrorist? Well, according to Glenn Beck's producer and his dictionary.com definition, maybe. But in that case, how would one describe a man who has been fueling such anger against the American government on television daily for the last 2 years? How, in other words, would one describe Glenn Beck?